Hey, all, welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I'm Darren, I'm your host, and today, yes, I've got another great guest, Mr. Scott Heimendinger. He is the Chief Marketing Officer, developer of the Anova Precision Oven, and he is also the creator of the Sansaire Sous Vide Circulator. I can't wait to talk to Scott about his career path and what he's doing now. I'll be right back with Scott Heimendinger from Anova.
Smoking, grilling, getting hot and hotter, sous vide and chilling from fire and water.
Hey all, Inkbird's been coming out with some amazing new products, and one of them is their brand new Wi-Fi Bluetooth barbecue temperature controller. So it allows you not just to monitor your temperature, the temperature of your cook from anywhere, but this one will let you actually control the temperature of your smoker, even if it's not a pellet grill. It'll work with Kamado type smokers, Weber kettle, Weber Smoky Mountain, has attachments for a couple different ones. Comes with 3 probes, one to monitor the pit, 2 to monitor food. You can set it manually on the unit itself or with the app using your mobile device. Check it out, guys. It's actually on sale right now on Amazon, so if you click on the link below, you can get a great deal. But check out Inkbird's Wi-Fi Bluetooth barbecue temperature controller. Back to the show. Welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren. I am your host. And today I've got another great guest I've been wanting to get on for a long time, but just so happens he's got a really great reason to be on right now. Mr. Scott Heimendinger. He is the Chief Marketing Officer of Anova Culinary, and he's got some great stuff that we're going to go over. Welcome, Scott. I appreciate you being on.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. Long overdue, but really glad to be chatting with you now.
Yeah, we are really, we're going to talk about a bunch of different things with you, but one of the things we're going to talk about is the thing that's sitting behind you. So, if anybody's watching, you're going to have to hang out till like the second half of the show, because Scott, you've been in this business and actually been in the technical side of the business for a long time. You kind of started your career with IBM, correct?
That's right. Yeah. My sort of original career path was in software. I went to school to learn to make software. And then my first job out of college was working for IBM. My job was essentially to babysit a data warehouse, a whole bunch of data that had to crunch overnight, and it would sometimes fail. And my job was to stay up with it and make sure it didn't. So not the most glamorous beginnings, but yeah, software was where I started, and then left IBM to go work for Microsoft in business intelligence. And so I ended up being a program manager on the Excel team. And it turns out that being ridiculously good at Excel is a skill that's applicable in almost every industry.
That's funny. So did you originally live in Seattle, or did you move there for a particular reason? Or
no, I grew up mostly in Southern California. High school was in Los Angeles, and then I went off to college in Pittsburgh. But it was Microsoft actually that brought me out to Seattle, and in pieces, my family actually has ended up here as well. So I've got kind of a Seattle contingent. My wife's up here, but it was Microsoft's doing, and then it kind of just so happens purely by coincidence that Seattle has become a little bit of a hub for sort of culinary innovation, and that was just a happy accident.
So when you left Microsoft, did you head directly over to Modernist Cuisine, and how did you go from a software geek to a food geek? Because your blog was originally called the Seattle Food Geek, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I'd always loved cooking growing up. I was very lucky. I had parents. It was a split household, but both my parents were good cooks, and we'd have dinner at home and all this kind of stuff. When I went to college, the campus food was not great. And so if I wanted to eat well, especially on a tight budget, I'd had to learn to cook myself. And so at that time, actually, most of my culinary education came from calling my dad while I was standing at the grocery store looking at like packages of chicken breast, going, okay, so what do I do and how do I cook this, whatever. And so I sort of got into cooking in college. but then when I was at Microsoft, this was the mid 2000s to late 2000s. That was about the same time that there was sort of this revolution in cooking going on, you know, where behind the scenes modernist cuisine was starting to write their book and build up these things. And I caught wind of sort of this vague idea that you could cook with an engineering mindset, right? That cooking wasn't just an arts and crafts kind of thing. In other words, like, you know, there are people in the world you can hand them a pencil and they can make a masterpiece, right? I am not one of those people at
Right.
all, right? But if you give me some like CAD software or a structured environment, I can actually express my ideas really well. So the notion that there was sort of a doorway or an entry to cooking that came from this structured world instead of the pure creative world was really, really exciting to me. So while I was at Microsoft, I would, you know, spend my weekends doing kind of project cooking and exploring and all this kind of stuff. And this was around also the same time in history where food blogs really started to, like, everyone and their mom had a food blog back then. Before the very first food blogger conference, before, you know, it sort of became more of an industry. And so I would spend basically every waking moment that wasn't work blogging, you know, doing experiments in my kitchen and blogging and recipes and all this kind of stuff. And one day I came across the Eaglet threads talking about sous vide cooking. At my very first entry point was a little before that. Somebody had served me an egg in a restaurant that was cooked sous vide, and it totally blew my mind. But then I found the threads and whatever. And at that time, if you wanted to cook sous vide, you needed to buy like a laboratory circulator off eBay and then hope that it didn't have Ebola residue on it, or, you know, whatever it was, right?
Wow.
But they were still super, super expensive. But my kind of engineer mind realized, like, I think I can make this on the cheap, and that led to my DIY sous vide machine build, which became very popular, and me sort of branding my blog as Seattle Food Geek and starting to get a little bit of sort of local, you know, following, notoriety, whatever you want to call it for that, and then I became aware that modernist cuisine was a thing that existed, that there was this lab, and it just turned out to be, you know, 5 miles away in Bellevue. And so while my boss was on vacation at Microsoft, I snuck over to modernist cuisine and did a stage, a culinary internship. And that was kind of my first step in joining them.
That's awesome. So you had no culinary background. You just like to cook. So you didn't go to any kind of culinary classes or anything like that. Just like me, I started out, actually, I worked in restaurants and I learned to cook in restaurants, but I never had a formal education in culinary. It's just people like you and me, it's our hobby and it's our passion. And when you're passionate about something, it doesn't have to necessarily mean you have to go to college and, you know, book learn it. You do it on your own, right?
That's right. Yeah, that was my path as well. I took the like civilian classes, you know, knife skills classes and seafood classes at the local. We've got this great Asian grocery in Seattle called Wajimaya, and they've got amazing seafood counter. They did class. So basically everything I could get my hands on, but no, I never went to culinary school, no formal culinary education. And those gaps are still evident in a lot of the ways I approach stuff, but the sort of my pathway and trajectory through all this has created other opportunities for me to kind of like help contribute, even though I don't have a formal culinary background.
Well, when I had Kenji on the show, I mean, I was really surprised to hear that he had never been to culinary school. He learned all what he learned in restaurants, cooking. He went to school for architecture and, you know, was cooking, you know, to get his way through college, and then fell in love with cooking, and then decided that he was going to make that his career path, but never went to culinary school, just learned, you know, in the restaurants that he was cooking at. So, I mean, it's, you know, if something's really, you're passionate about it, you're going to find a way. You're going to find any which way you can to learn it, especially nowadays. There's so much information out there with the, you know, YouTube videos and all the stuff that's available online. And we can do total culinary classes online now. So it's very easy to do. So from there, so you stodged over there in modernist cuisine and got really excited about it. And did they have a position open for you, or did you beg them to get you to
It,
come
it
on?
was it was more or less that I started showing up at the lab so much to work on geeky special projects that it would have just been awkward for them to, like I was hanging around so much. I sort of got friend of the lab status and all this stuff. And in getting to know Nathan a little bit, who was my boss for, I think, the better part of 8 years total, I think he realized that maybe he and I shared some of the same type of crazy, and that maybe it would be valuable to have me there. And so they created a role for me to join the team. I left Microsoft, which I had thought at the time, like, okay, well, this is pretty cool. I've got my day job, which I like, and I can use my day job to fund my hobby or the thing that I'm passionate about. So I'll go to work, Monday through Friday, and then I'll take my extra spending money and I'll put it into buying, vacuum sealers and centrifuges and purification, and all this kind of stuff. It had never occurred to me that there would be a viable career path that was the same thing that I loved doing that would also pay the bills. So I joined Modernist Cuisine full time. And at that time, though, I had already, some of the wheels were in motion already for launching Sansaire, for turning my $75 DIY sous vide machine into something that people could actually buy. And Nathan was, I brought it up to him in the job interview. I said, I have this idea. I think the world needs a low-cost sous vide machine. Is this something Modernist Cuisine would want to do? And he was wise enough to know what a pain in the ass it is to launch a hardware product. So he said, no, I don't think this is for us, but you knock yourself out. And so for most of my tenure, for my first sort of shift at Modernist Cuisine, I was also moonlighting getting Sansaire started.
Now, how was that? I mean, I don't think a lot of people understand that you were the creator and actually one of the driving forces behind making sous vide circulators affordable for everybody. I know when I looked and saw how much they used to cost, and I know there was a lot of DIY, like you said back then, where people were using crock pots with the actuator things that shut the power off to try to regulate the temperature. But there was only a couple of companies that were out there trying to make it affordable, and you were one of them. So how was that, especially since you had never done that before? I know you had some technical background, you had some culinary background now with Modernist Cuisine, but no manufacturing background at all.
Yeah, it's cliche, but it's true. Hardware is hard. So I had a couple of co-founders at Sansaire, and they helped with the hardware lift quite a bit. But I don't know if people realize really how bootstrapped and grassroots the whole endeavor really was. We never had any investor backing. The money we raised from doing our Kickstarter, and we could talk about that. That was one of the best days of my life. That really funded the company. That funded our production. That funded our ability to hire a couple of people and get an office space and the whole thing. And it really was like born, on our dining tables in nights and weekends. I knew, I should say, I had a really deep feeling that all the things that I loved about cooking sous vide were things that other people were going to love too. And that the problem was that the hardware was just too expensive and wasn't really designed to be home cook friendly at that time. It was bulky, it looked industrial, it was loud. It wouldn't pass the significant other test in a lot of cases. Is your partner gonna let you have this thing that lives on the countertop all this time? I also knew that one of the big barriers to sous vide cooking at that time was just information. Right? There were these threads going on online, but nobody had published like the definitive resource. But Modernist Cuisine was about to come out at that time, and that was going to break this down. That was sort of the first big resource consolidated, written for chefs and cooks as opposed to written for industry, that would explain all the nuances and things you need to know about pasteurization and cook chill and vacuums and whatever. So that barrier was coming down. So the only barrier that really remained was price and design. And so from the very beginning, the mission for Sansaire was, let's make a $200 immersion circulator. It was price first, everything else second. And I had sketched up a design for, kind of the overall shape of the thing, what the UI would be. And my co-founders worked with our factory to kind of help make that a real thing. We put together a Kickstarter campaign that was super grassroots, filmed in my kitchen at the time. A buddy had a video camera, and I wrote the script in PowerPoint, and that's how we did the whole thing. And then we launched, and then lo and behold, it's a company.
Wow. Yeah. Now I know that there's been some in the last couple of years that have launched, like the Nice Wave and a couple others, but there's already, you guys were the pioneers. So you were taking something from scratch that they had never seen before, and taking it to these manufacturers and going, this is what I want. Here's a drawing. Let's see if we can put something together. Nowadays, you can go on Alibaba and stick your name on something that, you've got thousands of them with different wattages and, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. You just stick your logo on it and you've got yourself a sous vide circulator. But back then, you were it. You were taking it something to them going, hopefully you can make this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it was useful that we had our, sort of my handmade, DIY prototypes as a benchmark. We could also use the pro units kind of as a performance benchmark to say, like, hey, we want to heat as fast as the expensive unit. We want to be as accurate as the expensive unit. But yeah, it was from scratch. And at that same time, give or take, the folks at Anova were doing the same thing. So we were sort of neck and neck in trying to reach the market at that period of time.
Now, I know that was kind of like your baby, and it kind of grew, and you guys, grew pretty quick. Let's talk about what happened, what's going on now in the industry, because you guys were pioneers. It was great, really exciting, and then everything just kind of exploded.
Yeah.
Is it kind of hard to patent those types of things? Because I think that's one of the things now, is that there's so many of them out there, and there's so many cheap ones. One of the questions I get all the time on the Facebook groups is, which one do I buy? Because there's one here's for $30, here's one for $200, and they all are different. Which one should I get?
Yeah.
How much did that affected your business at Sansaire?
Not at the time, because Sansaire I walked away from the company, and the company ended up effectively closing its doors before quite that level of scale or low end competition was really active. We were just starting to see the beginnings of that when I left, but it's something that we saw coming from pretty early on. So we thought, so for our launch strategy for Kickstarter, we wanted to get $100,000 so that we could, go to production. And $100,000, you do the math, was 500 customers. So can we find 500 geeks and nerds out there, just like us, who are willing to fork over some money and trust us to deliver them a machine? And it turned out that 500 was a bigger number. Like, that was more people than we expected. So that was the first really good sign that, like, maybe there's something here. But we started seeing these indicators of it going from the niche, from the geeks and the food nerds, to the mainstream. And that was really exciting. It was like, I celebrated every sale that we made at Sansaire, no matter what. Like, hey, another new customer, this is awesome. But it's probably not a surprise that our early customers sort of looked like us, right? They were kind of techie, and they were male. My favorite customer was the grandma from Okinoshia, who had been cooking her roast in the cast iron skillet for 40 years or whatever, and that she was willing to try this new thing. To me, that was sort of the canary in the coal mine, that this is going to go mainstream. And so it wasn't a matter of if, but when. We would talk about like, how far away are we from being able to walk into like a Dwayne Reed or a Rite Aid and see the $49 sous vide machine on the shelf next to the Mr. Coffee and the $20 toaster.
Yeah, and that's where we are now. But that's one of the things I think that really is hurts the method sometimes, because people identify it as a gadget
Yeah.
and not an overall. And that's one of the things I personally, on my Facebook groups and even on my podcast with some of the barbecue guys that I have on, they see it as a gadget. Even some of the old time chefs out there that, there's a guy that has, cooking classes online that, he's a chef from like the 80s, but he doesn't, promote or use sous vide, and he looks at it as a gadget. And I just hate that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's hard. There's a challenge for me too. I think broadly the world you can divide into two groups: people who haven't really heard about sous vide yet, and people who are evangelical about sous vide.
yeah,
right?
and it's still that way, even though it's more out there and more popular. There's still so many people who just now figuring it out, and they go, that's because the first thing they hear is it does a great steak, and here's what and they look at it because, well, it's something I've never seen before, it's just another gadget. But then, I started out that way. I was a big barbecue guy, and then I started playing around with sous vide, but I kind of hit on it really early on. I said, wait a minute, I could make a brisket instead of sticking it in a smoker for 18 hours and making it well done. I can make this thing medium rare if I cook it for, 48 to, 72 hours, and then have it nice and tender. That's what caught my attention. I was like, holy cow, this is something totally different than I've ever done before.
Yeah.
So, and I think you still have people that do that, but there's still a lot of people out there that don't know what sous vide is or even want to look at it. So.
Yeah. But the message has spread really far and wide, and I'm super proud of the sort of small part that I got to play in helping that initial thing. That it makes me really happy. For me, this way of cooking and the work that I've done, everything related, is all about making people feel good. Like at the end of the day, that's what a sous vide machine is. It's a device that turns anxiety into confidence. And the reason that, I get a little disheartened or sometimes a little passionate when people are so resistant to trying something new like this is because I know they're missing out on that superhero feeling that you get when you cut into your thing, for the first time. You're like, oh my God, like I didn't know I was capable of making something that looked this good. Right. And I just want everybody to have that feeling.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. And I also, it irks me when they're holding on, they try to pit cooking methods against each other. And that's one thing I just never understood. And it's happened really big in the barbecue, no, you got to cook a brisket on a offset smoker, even by the type of smoker, they get down to that, and you got to put mustard on it, and you got to put this certain rub. But there's 85 million different ways to cook anything, and you're just going to have a different result. I don't want to eat Aaron Franklin's brisket every day. I want to have, an option of how many different ways I can make a brisket. You know, I don't just eat, fried chicken from Popeyes and that's it. That's all I'm going to eat all my life. Right.
Right.
So I've always been you got to expand your knowledge and, your culinary skills to make new things and try something you never, thought you might like. So let's talk a little bit about Sansaire. After you walked away from Sansaire, you went back to modernist cuisine. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So I left Sansaire sort of not knowing exactly what I would do next, but hoping that I would figure it out. I did a little consulting work for a while with a company called Get It Right. They make amazing silicone cookware, spatulas, and that kind of stuff. And they were working on a coffee project at the time. That was super fun. And then I got a call from my old team at Modernist Cuisine saying, "Hey, we've got an interesting project. Would you be interested in coming back to play some more?" And I did. We had always wanted to make sort of TV show, kind of documentary, like Cosmos. I don't know if you've seen either the Carl Sagan Cosmos and like that for food, right? So there's plenty of television programming that's all about the personalities of chefs or the thought process of chefs, or this or that. We wanted to make something that was really about the science of food, but using kind of amazing cinematography to do it. Sadly, it was a project that we weren't able to get off the ground in the last couple of years, but spent a lot of time building new technology, prototyping stuff, inventing new camera techniques and all that stuff. And it was tremendous fun to be there and get to play.
But that led you to where you are now and what we're going to talk about for the rest of this time, because I know everybody's wanting to talk about it, and I know you are too. And I'm excited about it. I haven't, seen one in person yet, but I've seen all the hype. I watched your Instagram video on it the other day where you did the comparisons and all that, and where you went into depth a little bit, because that's the thing. I never really understood, and when you got into some of the stuff that you were talking about, and we'll talk about the wet bulb temperature and all that, I don't think a lot of people have that understanding, and you kind of explained it in that Instagram video. And I suggest that anybody go to Instagram, Anova Culinary's Instagram, and look up that video that Scott did, because it's very informative. And he does a comparison and all that. So we're going to talk about the Anova oven, and you came on board to kind of spearhead this, correct?
So yeah, very early on in the project. So Anova years ago had announced that they wanted to do an oven, and then they got acquired by Electrolux, and that project got delayed and delayed. And then not quite 2 years ago, I got a call from Steve, CEO of Anova. We had been very friendly over the years with Sons, even though we were competitors. I'd been to their office, and our teams had hung out together at industry events and all that kind of stuff. So it had been a friendly relationship. And Steve, plus their new head designer, Harry, said, "Hey, what do you think about steam ovens?" And I said, "I think they're inevitable. You're talking about combi ovens, right?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Yeah, they're like, from the modernist cooking revolution, like two things were inevitable: sous vide and combi ovens." And he said, "Well, why haven't combi ovens caught on?" And I said, because nobody's done a good one for home cooks yet, and tackled both the technology and the education. And I think that confirmed what he was hoping, like what he already knew was true, but was hoping to hear. And from then on, I was involved in the project and got to participate really heavily in R&D, along with fabulous product design team and the Electrolux teams that kind of help manage some of the factory stuff. And yeah, from inception to helping weigh in on which features it should have and how it should work and the design of the app, I've been extremely lucky to be involved in this product since basically the beginning.
So again, it's something where you took something that wasn't on the market, you were building it from scratch, you were taking something that's available in the commercial side in the restaurants, but is extremely expensive. The restaurant combi ovens are like 40 grand or so, and they have to be.
Yeah, if you want the self-parking feature, that one might run you 40 grand.
Yeah, and they got to be, most of them are like tied into your water line. They're not, they don't.
That's right.
Fill them up.
They require enormous electrical circuits and commercial permitting and the whole 9 yards.
And the funny thing is, I know that when the big controversy, like in New York City and stuff over sous vide with the health departments, they actually went to combi ovens. But then again, not, everybody and their brother can afford that type of pricing. They did it more as a necessity to keep the restaurant going, and they could write it off and all that. But, combi ovens have been out there a while, and they're very, like I said, just like sous vide was back in the days when you said, well, look, we need to do something to make it to the home cook. You guys are doing it with the combi oven, with this precision, the Anova Precision Oven. So walk us through how you guys started developing this. Since did you just do the same thing? You looked at what was already available commercially and say, all right, let's shrink this down and try to put as many features in as possible?
Well, the feature thing was really important. It was, what do we want the oven to be able to do for the end user? And there were a couple of things that came up really early as this is what we need to aim for. It needs to be really precise, because home ovens are not very good at holding the temperature that you set. You can set your dial to 375, but if you actually stick a thermometer in there and you log the data, you'll see this huge wiggly kind of sine looking wave where it's above the temperature, it's below the temperature. And with that being the case, like you have to babysit. You can't just rely on, hey, it worked this way yesterday, it's going to work this way today. There's way too much uncertainty. So precision was just table stakes from the beginning. But then the second thing, which we can get into whenever is appropriate, is we needed to control wet bulb temperature. Wet bulb is the temperature that food actually experiences when it's cooking. But this is something that's new terminology for almost everybody. And in order to do that, you have to be able to sense differently than a normal oven senses. So we actually had to invent that sensing capability. The way combi ovens do it, the commercial ones, uses a type of sensor that's just way too expensive to put in a home version of a product. So we had some invention work that we did for that. And then a ton of decisions about, how big is big enough? How big is too big? Because we want you to be able to do real cooking, but also fit it in a normal kitchen and all of these sorts of things. And so we've got so many iterations and hours of testing and design meetings and engineering and monitoring and data logging, the whole thing that went into trying to make the best oven we possibly could.
So let's take a back step and explain to people what this oven can actually do, because I don't think a lot of people understand that it can actually cook just like sous vide in this oven without a bag, or with a bag. You can put a bag on it if you want. But
that's right. Yeah.
Exactly what this thing can do, besides being a good convection oven on top of that.
Sure. So if you want to just make your grandma's cookie recipe just like you always did, you can do that in this oven. Just because it's a combi oven, just because it has steam capability, doesn't mean you always need to cook with steam. So that's thing number one. You can bake your cookies or whatever your traditional stuff. It's going to hold temperature better. It's going to heat up faster. That's all groovy. But the real power, and I think the reason it's relevant for folks like us, and I think for your audience here, is because it allows you to achieve the same results and the same sort of cooking approach that you do in a sous vide bath, but without having to set up the bath and without necessarily having to bag your food. Although sometimes there are good reasons to throw your food in the bag. And that part, once you sort of get it, once you really absorb what that means to be able to do sous vide style cooking, but not in a bath, it's mind-blowingly convenient. And all that sort of knowledge and experience and intuition that you've already built up from sous vide cooking, like what's your favorite temperature to cook ribeye, for example?
134.
134, great. Set your oven to 134 in sous vide mode, and you get the same results that you already know and love. So even though it's different, you get to take all that expertise that you've accumulated from sous vide cooking and apply it directly here.
Yeah. So it's precision temperature cooking that you can't get in any other oven.
That's right.
Like you said, if you stick a thermometer in your regular oven, even if it's a convection oven at your house, since it's cooking with air, and this is on your smoker, your grill, the same way. Anything that's cooking with air, it can't really control the heat, the temperature, because the air just does not conduct the heat well, and it's always moving around, and it can be different temperatures in every part of the oven. So what makes the steam, make this different?
So two things. So we're like science alert. We're about to
nerd out. We're going to nerd out.
We're going to go a level deeper into inception here. So I mentioned wet bulb temperature, but I'll take just a minute to explain it because it is so important, but it's something that you never hear about. Nobody teaches you about this. No cookbooks talk about this, but it's everywhere. We're all used to thinking that temperature is one thing. You stick a thermometer in the air, you stick a thermometer in your smoker, whatever it reads, that's the temperature. That is technically dry bulb temperature. So it's what a thermometer measures in air. But that's not the temperature that your food experiences. And that's because your food is wet. Even things you don't think of as wet have a lot of water. Like white bread has like 35+% water content, right? You think of bread as dry, but no, it really is wet. And wet foods experience different temperature than a purely dry thing because of evaporation. So think of it this way: you go into a sauna, right? A dry sauna, and the temperature in the sauna might be really hot, might be above 150 degrees Fahrenheit, right? You start to sweat, that sweat evaporates off your body always stays at a safe temperature, right? It's because when the water evaporates off the surface of something and turns into steam, that actually cools off what's left behind. It's called evaporative cooling, and it's actually the reason for the barbecue stall. But we can come back. We can come back to that. So that means that as long as evaporation is taking place, the temperature that your food experiences is different than the temperature of just the dry air. And that temperature minus evaporative cooling, that is wet bulb temperature. Okay, does that make sense so far?
Yeah, and I discovered this, and I didn't discover it, but I mean, personally, I figured this out when I first started cooking sous vide, and I took a spatchcock chicken and I cooked it sous vide at 148 degrees. I didn't chill it or anything. I took it on and I put it in my smoker, which was set at like 275 to crisp the skin. And I stuck my instant read or my probe to monitor the internal temperature. And I sat there and I watched it, and the internal temperature of the chicken did not raise. You know, it took 10 to 15, 20 minutes before the internal temperature started going up. So I'm figuring out going, you know, since it was already at 148 degrees, I guess it just kind of sat there, and it didn't, you would think it would automatically start rising, going up to 150, 160, and all of a sudden it's overcooked, but it didn't do that. It just sat there for the longest time before the internal temperature started rising. So is that similar to what you're talking about?
Yeah, what you're describing is sort of a type of barbecue stall. And it's because at that temperature, when the stall actually happens, you know, if you watch that curve where you stall out, that stall happens when the amount of cooling from evaporation equals the sort of amount of energy that's being put into the meat, when they're equal for a while, until the surface gets dry enough that evaporation reduces, and then you can start climbing up in temperature again.
So since there's so much moisture left in that chicken after I took it out of the sous vide, that's why it's not getting as hot, because it's still evaporating some of that moisture that's in there. But
off the surface in particular. Yeah. So put a pin in wet bulb temperature. Remember, it is the temperature of the air minus evaporative cooling. Okay. So let's imagine a slightly different scenario here. You're going to go back into that sauna, except this time, instead of being a dry sauna, it's a completely humid sauna, right? After a few seconds in that sauna at the same temperature, you are at like risk of mortal peril, right? You don't feel relaxed. You're literally, your body starts cooking. So why is that? Why does the humidity, being in a humid sauna, why is that so much more unbearable than being in a dry sauna? Well, air can only hold so much water. There's a maximum, and we use the term relative humidity as a measure of how much water is in the air versus how much it can hold. You might recognize the term from like the weather forecast. So, you know, it's a humid day, you know, humidity is 92% or whatever. They're talking about relative humidity. In that humid sauna, the air is already saturated. It's holding as much water as it can take, which means that when your skin sweats, there's no room for the sweat to evaporate. It can't go anywhere. And because it can't evaporate, it can't cool off. So you're not cooking at, you know, that lower temperature with evaporative cooling anymore. You're cooking at that 150 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever the sauna is at. So when you're at full humidity, the wet bulb temperature and the dry bulb temperature are the same, right? No more evaporative cooling. That's what happens inside a sous vide bag. A sous vide bag, when it's sealed, there's a little bit of moisture on your food or whatever, and there's a tiny little bit of air left in the bag. You never really get all of it. There's a tiny amount left. When you start heating up that food, all the water that can evaporates into that small amount of air, and it reaches 100% relative humidity. We can do the same thing in the oven. We can, by adding steam, by adding humidity into the cooking environment, you can saturate the air so there's no more evaporative cooling that takes place. And your food sitting in here, not necessarily in a bag, experiences the exact same cooking conditions you get if it were sealed in a bag in a bath. Does that make sense?
Definitely, because I live in Tampa, Florida, and we get 90% humidity here all the time. When I go outside, I could die.
Yeah.
If I go to Las Vegas and it's 110 degrees, it ain't bad. I go,
right.
This is nothing.
Yeah.
So
it's the humidity. Yep.
That's exactly.
Yep. So we can replicate the same conditions inside the sous vide bag, but we can do even a little more than that. Most ovens and smokers and all this kind of stuff only measure the dry bulb temperature, so they can only control the dry bulb temperature. We actually measure the wet bulb temperature directly. So regardless of how you have humidity set, at 100%, at 50%, 0%, we can make your food experience exactly the temperature that you want. So if you're cooking a steak, you might as well do it at 100% relative humidity, just like in the sous vide bag, and then you blot it off at the end and sear it, and off you go. But if you're doing a spatchcock chicken, for example, one of the problems with doing that sous vide is that the skin ends up getting kind of waterlogged, and it makes it really hard to get the skin crispy again in that second step. But in the oven, you can set the wet bulb temperature to exactly what you want, 145 or wherever you want it to be, but set humidity to 0. So that means the oven's not going to add any additional humidity into the cooking process. So the chicken experiences the temperature you want, but the skin stays dry. So you get this extremely crispy, sort of crackling skin when you sear it off in the second stage. And that right there is like the power of combi ovens and the power of this one.
And that's what really excites me about it. The only thing right now is because it's the size. It's kind of, you can't put a full packer brisket in there, but unfortunately, I mean, you're going to have that because.
So I can fit. In fact, we did a little video ad. I had 3 full racks of pork ribs going in the oven, and if I really shoved them in, I probably could have done 6, 2 on each tray. So it's hard to tell scale here. I've got a normal.
I could probably fit four human heads in there. There you go.
Yeah, that's right. But it's got some serious capacity. You're not gonna do a suckling pig in here or something like that. But you can do some very real cooking. By the way, I'm just keeping this in here so the light stays on, so that you can see the inside while we're talking.
Cool. So what else can this thing do? I mean, that's the main thing to me that excites me, is that now I got something to. All in one device, I can cook it sous vide, and I could finish it up, and I could do some other things that I couldn't do any other way. So what else can we do with this combi oven?
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite parts. So the oven comes with a food probe, and it plugs right into the wall on the inside of the oven. Now, food probes, it's not new. I think most of the barbecue community is probably already accustomed to monitoring internal temp of the food probe. But here's what's super cool. When we cook sous vide, especially in a bag, almost always we're doing what's called equilibrium cooking, right? So you want your chicken to reach 145. You're setting a bath temperature at 145 or maybe 146, something like that, right? And then you just wait until that internal temp levels off, and you can use these lookup timetable things to figure out how long you need to wait based on the thickness of your food and that kind of thing. And that works fine. But a lot of things take a while because you have to wait for it to climb those last couple of degrees. And if you were to plot core temperature over time for food cooking equilibrium style and sous vide, you'd see that at the beginning, the temperature rises pretty fast. But then as you approach that cooking temperature, it really levels off. And so those last couple of degrees take a really long time to achieve. The benefit there is that it can be unattended, right? You could leave that chicken in all day or leave your steak brisket in all weekend, and it won't exceed the cooking temperature. We all know this, no problem. But wouldn't it be nice if you could still hit the strike zone you were after for something like a steak or a chicken breast, whatever, but do it a little faster? And if you can monitor the core temperature of the food in real time, you can actually bump the cooking temperature up from equilibrium just a little bit, and it gives you this super speed gain. So for example, and I think in Celsius for my sous vide temperatures, so I may need you to translate, but say I like my steak at 52C, which is 125, somewhere in there. If I cook it at 52C, it's going to take about an hour for a 1-inch thick steak. This is kind of our standard thing. But if I bump the cooking temperature up to 62C, that same steak is done in 26 minutes. And 62C is like nothing above 52C. The doneness when you cut it is going to be nearly identical. So what's super cool that I love about this is because I can monitor the internal temp, I can make sure I always hit the strike zone, and I can cook a little faster. And in fact, using the app for the oven, I can create a cook program, or you can use one of the ones that's already published, to say, hey, set the oven to 62C, and monitor until the probe hits 52C, and then drop the temperature immediately to a holding temperature of 52C. So I hit my strike zone, but I still don't, I don't need to be there. It's still unattended. We call this general thing, the cooking faster than equilibrium, we call it sous vide express, since you get sous vide-like results, but a little bit faster. And that one's been sort of a game changer for me.
Now, you got me thinking now, can you use that? Because one of the reasons I said 134 on my ribeye is because on a top sirloin, I do 131 or 130. But at 134 on a ribeye, you're at the temperature where the fat starts to, break down a little bit more, the internal marbling, and some of the connective tissue that's in there, that 2 or 3 degrees actually doesn't really make too much of a difference on the doneness level, but it can make a whole lot of difference in the fat being rendered and the connective tissue starting to break down. Can you use that with that as well?
Totally. So all this control is up to you. We put a bunch of sample recipes, 150 something, in the app. And if you're curious, you can go install the app now. You don't need an oven to be able to explore the recipes, or go to oven.anovaculinary.com. You can view all the recipes in a web browser if you like. The point there was to give you some getting started points and to help you build this new intuition for when to use the modes of the oven and all that kind of stuff. Just like for sous vide, when you're starting out cooking sous vide, you need to develop a new intuition for things. But you can do it all from scratch as well. I don't know how well this is going to come through on the camera, but I can show you real quick inside the oven app here. You can build, sorry, we'll see if my camera will focus. One sec. You can build staged cooking programs. Let me back that up a little bit there and say, okay, for this first stage, do I want sous vide mode on or off? What's the cooking temperature? How much steam or humidity do I want to add? What's the element? And then you can add additional stages and string them together and say, okay, I want this stage to run for 10 minutes, or I want it to run until the probe hits this. And then I want it to automatically transition or manually transition to the next thing. And so you can do all this multi-stage stuff You can build your own programs with whatever settings you want. And pretty soon in the next week or so, we're going to give everybody in the community the ability to then publish those recipes back out to the whole world. So if you've got a method that works really well for you, you can share it, and I can just cook. I can hit a button and cook straight from your recipe.
From the program. That's pretty cool, because that's not available right now on anything I could do sous vide. So
yeah. And it's that multi-stage cooking is sort of a whole new world, you know. Sous vide introduced the idea of multi-stage, that, hey, you cook it until it's done, and then as a separate step, you sear it. In the oven, same kind of idea. Sometimes it's a searing step to finish. Sometimes it's like, you know, if I'm baking bread, I want the first part of the bake to have full steam injection, and then I want the second part of the bake to be dry. And you can string that stuff together automatically and create, you know, really cool stuff.
Yeah, that's where I see it. It's you can do so much more in it because you have that option of adding the steam, taking the steam away, you know, having the different steps that you can't do in the sous vide. Even, you know, if I'm cooking a steak, you know, just in the sous vide bath, I could go manually, or I could play with it on my phone, but there's no program in there to automatically adjust the temperatures and the other, you know, stuff that you can do with that oven. That's for sure.
And the other thing that's super cool is that the app is sort of like a DVR for everything you cook. So whether you cook just manually, you know, you can walk right up to the oven and set your settings and hit go, or you can build a program. It saves everything that you've done into your history. And so if you're doing experiments, you say, hey, you know, I really nailed it. Like, I like the way it turned out last time. You can go pull that one up from your history and replay it or modify it or whatever. So it makes it, it really helps sort of the experimentation kind of thing.
Yeah, believe it or not, the barbecue thermometers have been doing that for, you know, the last couple of years as well. The ones that are Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. One of their big selling points are they can record all your cooks. So when you do go, hey, yeah, that brisket turned out really good, you can go back and save it and use it again and again. So very. I'm blown away by this thing, and I never thought, you know, once I started playing around with sous vide, I didn't think something else would come out that would blow my mind as much as this. But let's talk a little bit about that, because this is, you know, something we talked about before we came on, is technology in the cooking space, whether it's outdoor or indoor, has just in the last 8 years has really exploded. And just when you think, just like with this, just when you think you've seen it all, or there's nothing else that can come out, there's something else that comes out. Where do you see something like this going? Because you guys are the, you know, innovators of it. Do you think in 5 years there's going to be 500 different, you know, home-based combi ovens and then something else coming out?
Well, of course, we hope that, you know, there's one primary combi oven.
Exactly.
Of course, no, we think combi ovens are gonna be super mainstream. It's really new, you know. I think for your audience is probably more likely to have heard the term combi oven before. It's clearly, you know, the style of cooking is stuff that they care about. But you ask a random person on the street, what's a combi oven? And you probably get a blank stare. But 10 years ago, you ask the random person on the street, what's sous vide? And you'd also get a blank stare. So these things catch on. You know, one of the big pieces of feedback that we've heard early on from the community is, this is awesome. When can I have a built-in version? And built-in combi ovens with varying levels of sophistication have existed for some time, but basically not in the US. Australia is ahead of the curve for using steam in some form or fashion in their cooking. Europe and Scandinavia, as you might imagine, are ahead of the curve. So there have been some built-in combi ovens in those markets that are starting to get a little bit of traction. We think that this, especially the way that we're presenting kind of the education and the guidance in the app, are going to be really powerful for helping us break through in the US and Canada and other parts of the world. And that everything we learn from doing this is going to get infused into future versions. So I think, you know, I don't know about 5 years, but 10 years from now, certainly, you walk into a Home Depot or appliance store or whatever, and there's going to be combi ovens that you can, buy and take home that day, kind of thing. I think the countertop market is still going to exist because people want to have multiple things going on at once, or want to have portability or that kind of thing. And yeah, we expect that other players are going to jump into this game as well. It's natural, right? We're going to create a market here. Other people are going to want to participate in that market. But we also know how awesome our community is in terms of exchanging ideas and giving feedback and providing recipes and all that kind of stuff. We hope that our community is really going to be instrumental in making the best content, the best education around this product.
Well, and Anova's never been shy about redesigning something that, if they have to, and coming out with something new or better, and making it, and that's one thing I want to touch out too. The price point on this at $600 is, not much more than the circulator for the Pro. So, I mean, it's really a bargain. It's under $1,000, but I'm sure that had to, I know, especially since you were involved when you said when you started your circulator, you had a price point in mind of what's going to be the pain, point. Who's going to, you got to get somebody to buy this thing, and it can't just be something, you're going to get one out of 1,000 people buy it. You want one out of 100, because you want this thing to spread, and you want people to have these in their houses. So I'm sure, just like with the sous vide circulators, it's going to be always price conscious, always being innovative, changing things that need to be changed, fixing things, adding things that can be changed and fixed or added on, for value. So
for sure. Yeah. The challenge here, we're really proud of hitting that $600 price. And for people who understand how much a combi oven can do, $600 is a steal, right?
Yeah.
Your next step up is basically $6,000.
Right.
For people who compare this to just sort of a nice countertop oven, $600 seems like a lot. And of course, we always want to make it as accessible as possible based on price, but it is just a much more complex piece of machine than anything else that Anova makes. We've got, 3 different heating elements, plus a boiler, plus the valves for the water, plus UI and control boards and all this, and it's there's so much more going on. What I would say is we always have our eye to the future. This is a hard thing to make much less expensive than this.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, like you said, you're not going to find anything in that price point. I mean, so you got the market right now, and you got the price point that people are going to go, I can afford that. I want to play with it. It's going to excite a lot of people, and it's going to open up competitors' eyes as well, I'm sure. So, I mean, I'm sure it's you're going to have, Breville or somebody else right nipping at your, heels going, dang, man, why didn't we have something like this? But hey, sometimes it's good to be the first, and sometimes it's when you're as innovative as this thing looks like it is, and I can't wait to play around with one. So make sure you send a couple more ships filled from with those.
Yeah, we can't get them imported fast enough.
Yeah, and that's great. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about, Scott? What's in the future for Anova? This is the big thing, I know, and you're going to take up a lot of your time. Let's talk about that too. So now you just got promoted. When you first came on with Anova, you were as a contract employee. So you were just there to kind of get this thing going. So just recently, within a month, they just made you the chief marketing officer, correct?
That's right. Yep. So officially joining the Anova Food Nerd family, no longer just a hired gun.
Well, that's great too. That means you're a little bit more invested in it as well. So
yeah, I really care. Like I mentioned earlier, I really care about helping the world cook better. You feel so good about yourself when you put food on the table and it's turned out the way you want it to. It makes your friends and family feel good. I want to spread that feeling as far and wide as I possibly can. And Anova and the amazing community that they've cultivated over the years, and just fabulous products with integrity. I can't think of a better way to channel that desire than to help reach people with Anova.
I've always said there's nothing better than doing something to make money that you actually love to do, because it's not really a job then. It's just something that you love to do, and it seems like that's what you found, what you love to do, and you're able to make money at it. So
I count myself very blessed.
And you get to play around and build these things and help other people, and it's a great way to do it. That's for sure. Well, thanks, Scott, for being on. Anything else you want to say about anything else going on in your life? How's things in Seattle with all this craziness going on?
It's been a little touch and go. This is a weird time for the world. I cannot wait to bid 2020 adieu at the end of this year. But all the important stuff is good. We've got our health. We're lucky. We've got our work. And I get to spend so much of my day interacting, even though it's just virtually, with customers who have started getting their ovens and are showing off the things that they're cooking. And that just makes me so happy. So, yeah.
Now, that's a great thing too, is that you're still living in Seattle, that Anova didn't make you move to San Francisco to take that position. So
that's right. Yeah. In fact, Anova has committed to, we've got a distributed team now. We're a little bit all over the place. I think it's very forward thinking.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you being on, Scott, and I'm glad you are able to explain and go into detail about this oven and talk about your history as well. I really find that very interesting, and I hope everybody else did as well. Make sure you guys check out the Instagram for Anova Culinary. Check out the video that Scott did, where he went into the details and did some comparison cooks on the oven. Make sure you check out Anova Culinary. I will put links in the description below, and you can also find them on my website. Thanks again, Scott. I appreciate you being on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, buddy. Well, I want to thank Scott Heimendinger again for being on. It was great to have him to discuss his history and getting the sous vide circulator into the homes of many, many people, and also talking about the new Anova Precision Oven. You can check out the Anova Precision Oven in the link below. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Make sure you subscribe to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast here or in the video form on YouTube and my Facebook page. Thanks for joining us again, and I'll see you again on the next Fire and Water Cooking Podcast.